Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I'm with Ray McGovern, and we're going to have a little discussion about Zelensky being in Washington. We're going to talk about what's happening in Ukraine and how that's going to turn out, and even a bit about Gaza. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here with the one and only Ray McGovern, a co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, right, Ray? Is that, I always forget what that stands for.
Well, actually, there wasn't much sanity in Washington, so it's kind of a nice niche we fell into.
Yeah, it would be nice to see some now. As you probably know, Ray McGovern spent many years at the CIA, and he's doing very good work these days. Ray, let's start. We're going to talk a bit. Let's start with this. I'm not going to badger the witness or ask any leading questions. Zelensky comes to Washington, kind of remind when he left and he passed the collection plate, and it kind of reminds me many years ago. I was young, but there was a which one was it? There was somebody. They had this guy had all these kids, but at any rate, on the show, they would pass the collection plate around when they went to church, and when it got in front of them, they'd pluck the bottom of it so it made noise and pretend to put some in. Of course, no money went in the plate. Well, he passed the plate around. I don't even think they plucked the plate in Washington, D.C. He comes back with an empty plate. What are your thoughts about that, Ray?
Garland, it's one of the more confusing things that I've ever dealt with. A couple of months ago, Biden said that Russia has already lost this war. Head of CIA said not only that, but the ineptitude of the Russian military forces have been shown, exposed for all whole world to see. Huh? I mean, now they're saying, we can't let Putin win. No, we can't. If we let Putin win, the next thing you know, he'll be in Poland and the Baltic states. He'll be taking over the rest of Europe, So, crazy stuff. I mean, stuff you might imagine, 30, 40, 50 years ago when the Soviet Union was in place. Russia has lost. Here Zelensky is in Washington, and you have this strange report. The intelligence community says 87% of the Russian forces that existed when the Russians invaded Ukraine been killed, died, KIA. Now, that's ridiculous on its face. Best estimates are maybe 60,000, could be as many as 80,000 Russian troops killed. The information in this is pretty good. I mean, there's so much stuff going around that you can sort of calculate it, not precisely, but the Russians don't release their figures. What do we know about Ukrainians? Well, they don't release their figures either, but we know that they've suffered. Well, best estimates are 400,000 killed, and usually multiply by 3 or so to get wounded. So this is a terrifically stupid report if you know what's up. And of course, it comes out of the day Zelensky's in Washington. Look, we're winning. And we can't let Putin win. Although we thought he won 2 months ago, but no, we can't let him win, right? And so look, we're beating the Russians. Now, the sorrowful thing here, and this is really sad because these are two guys who acquitted themselves really well before Iraq. They talked to the right people, like me, if I say so myself, all right? And they got it right. They said there weren't any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There's a whole bunch of BS, okay? They worked for Knight Ridder at the time. They had an editor who went with them, and they came off smelling really good, and everybody else came out smelling really bad. Their names were Jonathan Landay and Warren Strobel. They've taken many accolades and a lot of applause for all this. But who wrote these latest things? Well, Reuters, Jonathan Landay. Wall Street Journal, same story, same day, Warren Strobel. I'm like, come on, guys. I guess you have to make a living, but why don't you join Garland Nixon and me and make an honest living and not do this kind of stuff? So those figures were off by a factor of 4 or 5, okay? And they're just so patently absurd and so patently designed to reassure Congress that we're winning here. Look at all those Russians we killed. That's the idea, right? We got to go weaken Russia. See? So that's the mainstream media to a T. Now, the good news, of course, is that where's my cell phone? Don't have it here. Oh, yeah, here it is. This is the new weapon, okay? In other words, I make a point of going back in history and citing the fact that new technology really had a profound influence on wars, like the telegraph, the turn of the century. Like more recently, some of you may have been still alive or already alive. This is when Iran, the Shah, being supported by us and his terrible secret police, just as bad as the SS, really. And Khomeini, Ayatollah, was in Paris, and he used the latest technology. And what was that? It was something called a tape recorder, right? And he did his sermons into the tape recorder, and then they put on a little cassette, about this size, right? They played from every minaret in Iran, and you had the revolution. Now, that was not the only reason, but it was a substantial reason. So what we got now? Well, in Gaza, for example, we've got everybody still, when there's electricity at least, and to power these things, we've got these iPhones. And we've got actually a couple of reporters in there now. And we've got a growing number of people in America here who give a rap, who care about what's going on there to people. So Biden has to realize really soon that he's losing the younger generation, which seems not so hardened, not so inoculated against this kind of, well, let's say a genocide. It's a textbook case of genocide. So I forget what your question was, Garland, but that's where I come out on this stream of consciousness.
Oh no, that's excellent, excellent. Let me ask you this, because we saw that article. Okay, 87% of the Russians are gone. We remember they were fighting with shovels. Within a week after the conflict started, they were running out of missiles. I read an article where one of the Republicans, Tommy Tuberville, they gave him this briefing, and Tommy Tuberville basically came out of it and said, I don't believe any of that stuff anymore. He said, I don't believe that if the Russians win, they're going to, head for the English Channel. He didn't believe it. And so it's kind of, the propaganda, the BS got so deep that it looks like they've lost everybody now, the Chicken Little stuff, and nobody believes that. I believe some of the Republicans even said, we don't believe this business about Putin just wants to expand the Soviet Union, be the Tsar Putin or whatever. It seems to me that they played the propaganda hand so deeply that there's no credibility anymore, right? And there's no credibility means no funds.
I'd like to think so, Garland. I still think most of the American people have been brainwashed. I think that's the right word, to hate Putin, hate Russia, hate Hamas, So I guess the reality is, what does Biden believe? Now, up until a couple of months ago, I didn't know. I said, can he really believe this drivel? that the U.S. is the sole exceptional country in the world, indispensable even? Can he really think that China is challenging him to a duel? I mean, after 2 months in office, he says China wants to be the major power in Asia, and that's not going to happen on my watch. How well? How? I mean, why not? The Chinese have this. Can't we just get along? Or how about a win-win, Joe? So anyhow, it depends on the president and those around him. So Biden comes out of this Cold War atmosphere, and I don't think he's a very bright guy. And I don't think, and this is even more important right now, he's fully compos mentis. So if he's acting out of this set of thoughts that the U.S. can still work its will wherever in the world, and the only country we have to listen to is Israel for political reasons. And if he really thinks that we can prevail in places like Ukraine, in places like the Middle East, and even the Far East, and worse still, that we could do that all together, like a trifecta. We're going to win at all three. Well, he's crazy. Well, he's not in reality. Okay. Now, I heard, or actually, I saw a transcript of a little talk he gave in Maine about 2.5 months ago. Okay. And this time he's not speaking from the platform. He's not reading his notes. He's in a little living room with some people that's going to vote in the primary. And they say, well, what do you think about the U.S. role in the world? And he wrote back and said, well, we have to be the leader. We have to be the leader. Otherwise, the world will fall apart. So, yeah. And as a matter of fact, Madeleine Albright, to her credit, she said, we are the indispensable country in the world. And so we just have to act that way. If we have a primary military force, well, you use it, for God's sake, like she told Colin Powell. What do you get that military force? You're not going to use it, okay? Now, she's the worst person to cite. I mean, some people remember. I keep thinking it's getting on years here. But when Madeleine Albright was asked by Leslie Stahl, great big, I think, CBS interviewer, and Ms. Albright, because of the sanctions you laid on Iraq, and this is before the final war with Iraq, 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 have died. Tell me, do you think this is worth it? And Albright said, yes, it's worth it. We think it's worth it. Blah, 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 blah. Now, so what I'm saying here is that Biden is citing his patron saint, Madeleine Albright, saying, yeah, it's worth it to keep our hegemony. Hegemony comes from a Greek word. Hegemon is the same. It's hegemai, okay? It means not only to dominate, okay, but to lead. You got to lead. So the U.S. has got to lead. Well, the problem is the U.S. can't lead anymore because this unipolar world is gone kaput. I don't say bipolar world. I say, no, I'm sorry. I don't say multipolar world. I usually say a bipolar world because it's really the US and the UK and NATO, all of which are literally white against the rest of the world. China, India, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Iran, you name them. It's like all these lily white folks embodied in NATO against the rest of it. And of course, the Russians are now with the rest of those folks that are not in the white club. So there's a degree of racism here that nobody adverts to because it's just a little bit too embarrassing. And when you look at Ukrainian refugees or them seeking asylum somewhere or seeking succor or some place to live, well, they're beautiful people. We say, well, that, we saw the Syrian refugees back 5-10 years ago. They were from hunger, literally from hunger. These Ukrainians, they look more like us, okay? And what about Gaza? Okay. The Gazans don't look like us. You know, this is our, in my view, um, this is our cardinal sin, our original sin, because we white guys at least, not you, Garland, and that's an important distinction. We started as colonial hegemons, and we started as racists and wiped out the native population in our country because they didn't look like us and they weren't as advanced. And when you come down through history, and I was in the army during Vietnam, and I remember all the fighting that went on there, and not only there, but in California and other places where young people were saying, "No, no, no, we don't want any more of this." Angela Davis. Some of you, I hope most of you know who Angela Davis was. She's a very prominent attorney now, but she was one of these main demonstrators coming out against the war. And she was a fugitive from justice. And they got her. Okay. The FBI nailed her, right? And so she appears on the cover of Newsweek in chains. Now, I want to share something with you that was very poignant when I learned of it. After that happened, she got an open letter. James Baldwin was in Paris at the time, and he wrote this letter November 1970. Dear Sister Angela Davis, one might have hoped that by this hour, the very sight of chains on black flesh would be so intolerable a sight for the American people and so unbearable a memory that they would spontaneously rise up and strike off the manacles. But now, more than ever, Americans appear to measure their safety in the chains and the corpses of others. And so Newsweek puts you on its cover chained. You look exceedingly alone, as say, as the Jewish housewife in the boxcar headed to Dachau, or as any one of our ancestors chained together during the ocean passage. Let me put it this way, says James Baldwin. As long as white Americans take refuge in their whiteness, they will allow millions of other people to be slaughtered. So long as they put so long as their whiteness puts so sinister a distance between their own experience and the experience of others, they will never feel themselves sufficiently worthy to become responsible for themselves. As we once put it on our black church, they will perish in their sins, that is, in their delusions. Finally, my dear sister, Angela, some of us, white and black, know how great a price has already been paid to bring a new consciousness. If we know that, then we must fight for your life as though it were our own, which it is. We must render impassable with our own bodies the corridor to the gas chamber. For if they take you in the morning, Sister Angela, they'll be coming for us that night. Therefore, peace, Brother James. I hope that resonates with the rest of you, okay? They take you in the morning, they'll be coming for us at night. The bill that just passed, the military appropriation bill, includes provisions for expanding the law on illegal, in my view, unconstitutional surveillance. So when they come for us in the night, they'll know exactly where to go and who to pick up. And this whole thing about the injustice of people of color facing the colonialists. Well, the bad news is that's history. The good news is that's ended, because now we have a bipolar world, and the East is rising, The South is rising, and the U.S. will have to get some sense into its head because it's no longer indispensable. The only final note on this: when I lecture in universities, I try to be smart. I try to say, okay, uh, back in the day, we learned a lot of grammar, and anybody know what a synonym is? And usually a couple of people, yeah, that's a like word. I say, how about an antonym? Antonym, huh? Usually one person, that's an opposite word. So right, okay. Now listen carefully. What's the antonym for indispensable? Maybe dispensable. You got it. So if we are the indispensable country in the world, all the other countries are, by definition, dispensable. How do you think that goes over with people over whom we can no longer exert hegemony? Well, it doesn't go over really well, and that showed in the United Nations just this past week. I'll end this little segment with that, but it pains me greatly that people aren't really not aware of how we identify with other white people like the Israelis, most of them, okay, and are willing to overlook what's happening to the Palestinians. I mean, our country enabling, arming, genocide like Jens's people, the race, whole people side homicide, killing them. Well, that's what's going on here. So all we need to do, it seems to me, is get off our derrieres and go out there and fight just as strongly as Code Pink and other people. Demonstrate, close off highways. Just do what you have to do to make the point. This is not done in our name. And we have to face into these politicos. Some of them are getting a little bit of a good sense now, but meanwhile, thousands are dying. And I fear that thousands are dying every week. And I fear that their compatriots, the Palestinians in neighboring countries in Lebanon and Jordan, and even Saudi Arabia, they're going to cause real problems for their governments. And thus their governments come and help the ones that were driven into Gaza 1948, 1967. It's on the books. The UN has a resolution. Most people don't even know this. That's what comes of age, right? When the Israelis decided they needed some Lebensraum, okay, that's what the Germans used to, a little spreading out area. We need more area. They started a war in 1967 in June, okay? Now, what did they do? Well, they made believe that Syria and Egypt were about to attack them, and they attacked them, okay? And they took over Gaza. They took over the West Bank. They took over the Golan Heights in Syria, okay? They took over the Sinai. Now, that was June, early June 1967. That same year, November 22nd is the date, the UN Security Council voted unanimously that Israel must withdraw from the occupied territories, okay? Now, unanimously, 1967. Now, some people say, well, they were just defending themselves. Doesn't Israel have a right to defend themselves? Their former prime minister came to Washington 1982. He's filling his oats, and he says, we really need to be, Menachem Begin his name. He's like, we really need to be honest here. The Egyptians were going to attack us. We decided to attack them. Let's look at be honest, in 1967. Well, the Israelis are riding high, and they can only ride high because what we enable them to do, what our taxpayer money is going to in terms of arms and political support, that has got to stop.
Let me ask you this. You've referred to Zionism as a colonial product gone racist. What do you mean by those two things?
Well, the Zionist movement back in the late 19th century was a kind of was a move in Europe to try to find some place for a Jewish nation. Now that evolved into a Jewish country that is de facto racist. I've been there. I have a little scar here, which I won't show you, from a tear gas canister shot at a delegation from Veterans for Peace that I was privileged to be with about 6 years ago. Okay, I seen how they treat the Palestinians, and it's a racist, out and out racist. Well, you don't have to believe Mcgovern. Just look at what Israeli leaders are saying. They call them animals. They call them worse than animals. Okay, so in terms of racism, it's never been so clear to me that just as the Nazis hated the Jews, okay, considered them Untermenschen, okay, less than subhumans, okay, the Israelis are saying the same thing openly now. I'm not sure the Germans said it very openly. I have to go back in history and look at that. But they're saying it openly. They have to be driven out of Gaza, and where are they going to drive them to? Egypt won't take them, at least not so far. Maybe they will be pressured into. I don't know. But okay, so it's Zionism has become racism, pure and simple, and the Israeli government makes no bones about this. It's a Jewish country. Well, if it's a Jewish country, then other people are less than Jews. They're subhuman in the worst case. At least they don't have the rights. They don't have any rights. I've been there, seen it. You know, I'll tell you one little vignette. How do they justify this? Well, some of them still cling to the Hebrew scriptures, right? So here we are. This is another delegation I was with about 10 years ago. We're going up the hill to this beautiful Israeli settlement, okay? Colonists settle, right? And they pick the top of the hill to put their settlement, and their buildings are alabaster white, okay? But going up there, you pass a Palestinian village, okay? Really destitute poverty, no running water. You stop, you talk to the people. Well, it looked pretty bad. Okay, so you go up the hill and you meet the mayor of this settlement, of this little city, and he's from Cleveland. And one of my colleagues says, how do you justify living up on? We noticed you got your sprinklers on. They're really nice, the ones you got here, but people down to by the bottom here, the village that we passed on the superhighway, which Palestinians aren't allowed to use, they were in abject poverty. How do you? So he said, I'm glad you asked that question. It's very simple. Deuteronomy 15:4. God promised us this promised land filled with milk and honey. So, Garland, I don't know the Hebrew scriptures as well as I know the Christian scriptures, but I did know Deuteronomy 15:4. And so I said to this guy, Rabbi, he was a rabbi, please read us the second half of that verse. He said, what do you mean, second half of that verse? You only read the first, you only read us the first half. Read the whole thing. He looks at it, he says, oh, okay, you shall have this, your promised land with milk and honey, so that there will be no poor among you. So there will be no poor among you. Whoa. Now that's not Zionism. That's the best in Hebrew Jewish tradition, going back millennia. Okay, the little pedantry may be applicable here. Going back to pre-Aramaic, the word for justice was tzedkah. Now, what did it mean? It's denotation, not connotation. What justice meant, tzedkah, was showing mercy to the poor. Okay? And that's the Abrahamic tradition, You care about the widows, the orphans, the refugees, and why is Hamas so popular that they won hands down in 2006 and would win again, according to the latest poll, because they take care of the women, orphans, widows, and refugees. Um, it comes right through, Yahweh, if you will, Jesus of Nazareth, and the prophet all cared about one thing primarily, and that was that we do justice, that we show mercy. And as I said, the pre-Hebrew, pre-Aramaic word for justice meant showing mercy to the poor. That's not Zionism. Zionism is what that the first half of that Deuteronomy 15:4. So the discussion didn't go well after that. We left early, and it was just kind of a good example of how, what's the word, hypocritical those people living on the top of the hill there with the sprinklers going, and how privileged they felt, and how they couldn't do it without U.S. money, $4 billion a year for the last 10 years.
Ray, we're seeing, and I'll actually say this. I think part of the reason that the Congress is reticent to come up with $60 billion for Ukraine is that they're strapped a lot tighter than they want to admit. I understand that within the next year, the budget, the payment on the debt alone within the next 18 months will be $1 trillion. That by the time we just do their payment on the debt and the military budget, which they just passed another one for 886 billion, there won't be anything left. So I imagine that there's some concern about money there, but another concern. They voted to continue to do an inquiry into Joe Biden's shenanigans, the Biden clan shenanigans, and many people have forgotten, prior to this conflict, the Israelis were in the streets furious at Benjamin Netanyahu, and this guy has a lot in common with Joe Biden in that he's already been found out, investigated, and in the and in the event that he loses his position, the likelihood is that he'll get 4 hots and a cot, as they say, in the Huskow also. Your thoughts about the effect, and does it have any effect on their decision making of Biden and a Netanyahu both facing potential prison time for corruption?
Well, let's do Netanyahu first, because that's the easiest one. If he loses power, he goes to jail, unless he goes to Miami, I guess. That's it. And so he can't afford to lose. And it's a personal thing. Now, personal equities have a lot to do with how history unfolds. So that's it, pure and simple, with Netanyahu. He's extremely unpopular with many Israelis. Just now they have this bloodlust, this revenge feeling that overwhelms everything. And that's 80% of them, okay? Anyhow, okay, let's do Biden, because Biden is the more important thing as far as I'm concerned. Hunter is not, when they look at Hunter's stuff, enough has been revealed already to indicate that Daddy is pretty much partaking of these bribes and all this kind of. The whole Biden family is living high on a hog because Joe was vice president and now he's president, and now Hunter is acting up like an adolescent again. He won't heed the subpoena, and so the Republicans have the goods on Joe Biden, in my view. Now, some people will disagree. I've seen enough to see that there's enough there. So what does that mean? That means Joe Biden feels the same way as Netanyahu. He can't lose. He can't afford to lose, okay? He can't afford to lose in Ukraine, okay? Because if he loses in Ukraine, he'll lose the election. And if he loses the election, especially if that other guy comes in, who is our president, what's his name? Trump. I mean, you could expect a pretty vengeful person coming in who has a lot of reason for vengeance, actually, for what they did to him. So if he's got the goods on Joe Biden, is it likely that Joe Biden would go into jail? Well, Hunter would, and how about these other guys? Well, take this Tony Blinken, for example. Now, people talk about interference in elections, Russian intelligence interfering in elections 2016. BS, proven BS now. I hate to use Trump's word, but it was worse than a hoax. It was BS. Okay, we can prove it. It's in court documents. Okay. Now, how about 2020? Did intelligence interfere with the election 2020? Well, yeah. Oh, but it wasn't the Russian? No, it was U.S. intelligence. let me remind people, when Hunter Biden's laptop came out, and the contents was so scurrilous, so yucky, including evidence of bribery, not only for Hunter, but for Daddy and the family and all that kind of stuff. Something had to be done, okay? Because somebody leaked it to to the New York Post, the oldest newspaper still running in the United States, okay? And the Post printed it. What happened to the Post? Well, they were knocked off Twitter. They knocked off. They were suppressed. The story was suppressed. Okay, and then the last debate was coming up, and the word was out. Oh, this scurrilous stuff. What's going to happen? So Tony Blinken calls up Mikey Morell, who used to be acting director of the CIA, and was going to be director if Hillary had won. And he says, Mikey, let's do something about this laptop. Hey, can you rustle up some high intelligence officials, retired, to say that it was a Russian disinformation operation? Could you do that? And Merle says, sure. How soon do you need that? Well, the debate is next week. Could we have it in 2 or 3 days? Sure. So Morell goes out, talks to all these corrupt former directors of national intelligence, directors of the CIA and so forth. He runs up 50 of them. 50, right? Okay. He adds his own name and it's 51, okay? And what do they say in a formal statement leaked to Politico? Hunter Biden's laptop was simply a Russian intelligence disinformation operation. Okay. Whoa. So 2 days later, the last debate. So Trump raises it. So what about your son's laptop? It shows you're in some bribery and stuff like that. And and Joe says, oh, I'm glad you asked that question. Don't you know, Donald, that 50 former intelligence managers, 3 of them former CIA directors, have called that a Russian intelligence disinformation operation. Did you know that? And Trump, not wise to the ways of Washington, had no report. Now, I don't know if that affected the election very much. I suspect it did a little bit. Whether it would have thrown enough votes, who knows? But that's how bad interference in elections by intelligence officials, and in this case, the U.S. intelligence officials. This time they won. 2016, they lost. You had the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, head of the national intelligence, everybody else doing all kinds of unsavory and illegal things to help Hillary Clinton win, and she lost anyway. And when James Comey, the head of the FBI, was asked, how did you think you could do that? He said, well, this is a quote. He says, he wrote in this book, I was operating in an environment where Hillary Rodham Clinton was sure to be our next president of the United States. Period. Well, if you're operating in that environment and you do all these illegal things, Russiagate first and foremost, then you're going to be promoted. You might become attorney general for God's sake. I mean, you're not going to be put in jail. Whoa, big surprise! You could be put in jail, and the whole rest of the 4 years under Trump was designed and effectively used to keep them chained, to keep them not doing anything constructive with respect to foreign affairs, especially with respect to creating a more decent relationship with Russia. So the story is pretty bad, okay? And people don't realize this because the mainstream media, even the good ones, as I mentioned, the two that got weapons of mass destruction before Iraq, right? Even they have found that they need to get really nice new shoes and not to be on your program, Garland, or with me on other programs, but to be sought by the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, and no doubt paid handsomely. These guys are good guys. I knew them back then. What's that? 23 years ago, 22 years ago. It's very sad because that's the bad news. The good news, of course, is that you and I are going to be seen by some people, maybe even as we speak, and all these iPhones are going to show us what's really going on in the world, especially in Gaza. And I think things from this real low will get. It's got to get better. Let's hope.
Well, let me ask you this. One of the discussions that has been out there is about the origin of the let me change this. I'll put it a more accurate way. In February of 2022, the Russian Federation entered into what was already a hot war. Okay. At that point. And one of the questions, people who are even, well-meaning, I don't agree with this war. Putin made a terrible mistake. Putin shouldn't have done this. The Russians, this was a horrible, this was a terrible, this was an evil. And I look at it and I take a different perspective. One of the things I say is this, Ray. If the Russians and the Chinese overthrew Mexico and started building bases, military bases, putting in missiles and pumping in, and all of their people were taking over all the companies, and they were meeting with the Mexican army saying, as Lindsey Graham said, next year we go on offense against the United States. We're going to go after the United States. They're wrong. The U.S. would go to war. So here's my question to you. For those who say, that was the Russian leadership, they say Putin, but the Russian leadership made an error, a mistake. They shouldn't have done that. This is terrible. Were there other options at that particular time? Did the Russian Federation, the leadership of the Russian Federation, have any other options at that time other than to enter into what was already a hot conflict?
The evidence is clear, in my view, and I've laid it out. I take great satisfaction in the fact that John Mearsheimer, other people who know which end is up, agrees with me. Putin did everything he could possibly do to avoid having to invade. The primary example, of course, is the Minsk Accords. After the coup in Kiev, where everything started going down in U.S.-Russian relations, I mean, after all, you change the government in a neighboring country like Ukraine, you're going to have consequences. Well, after Crimea, where Russia's only ice-free year-long naval base is, after Crimea voted to be annexed by Russia, well, those little regions, the oblasts is what they're called, out there in Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, they said, look, we don't want to live under this cruel regime either, this coup regime, okay? Cruel coup regime. They've already banned Russia. They want to join NATO. We want any part of that, okay? So annex us too, will you please? Please, annex us. So we've already declared independence. Now, please just annex us. And Putin said, no, I won't do it. So we're talking about 2014 summer, and then the fall comes, and the Ukrainian military, at U.S. behest. John Brennan, the head of the CIA, was there in April, just 6 weeks after the coup, saying, "Yep, go ahead, take care of these people out there. We'll support you, give you the weapons and so forth." So they went after these people in Donetsk and Lugansk. It was fierce fighting, and then finally people said, "Well, nobody's going to win this, so let's get together." They met in Minsk, Belarus, and they had an agreement in 2014, and then the big one was in 2015, and it provided for ceasefire. And key, it provided that the constitution of Ukraine would be changed to allow a measure of autonomy for these two regions, these two oblasts, Donetsk and Lugansk. Okay, that was the deal. Was it authoritative? Well, sure as hell was. You had France and you had Germany vouching for this, as well as Donetsk representatives, Lugansk, and of course the Ukrainian government. Okay, so this is the real deal. Went to the UN. The UN approved it unanimously. Guess what? The Russians got diddled. It's a Bronx word. Okay, you know what it means, but it means what happened was the U.S. said, "No, you don't have to agree. Let's keep taking pot shots at those Russian speakers in Donbass, Lugansk, and Lugansk and Donetsk." And so they did. And over the years, the thousands and thousands of Russian civilians, no reason to be shelling Donetsk city, civilians are being killed. So we learned after the special military operation started in February of 2022 that this was all a sham. "Oh, Mcgovern, you're falling for Russian propaganda." No. Angela Merkel, who was Chancellor of Germany at the time, said, this was just a delaying tactic. In 2014, 2015, Ukrainians didn't have much of an army. We needed time to build them. And look at them now. They're NATO equipped. They're NATO trained. She said this right after, in December of 2022. Okay. And then, if that weren't enough, then the head of France at the time, what was his name? Francois Hollande. He says, yeah, Angela's right. That's why we did it, right? Then Poroshenko, who was the head of Ukraine, and then Zelensky said it. But just 2 weeks ago, the chief negotiator for the Zelensky government, who met with the Russians in Belarus and then in Istanbul in Turkey, and signed an agreement for a ceasefire, okay, and for a regional degree of no membership in NATO and so forth. He said, "Oh yeah, well, they said no, we won't support that. That is the U.S., UK, NATO. No, so we, even though I initialed it," says the chief representative from Kiev, Boris Johnson came in and said, "Look, the Allies, we're not going to support you if you go ahead and have an end to this right now." Well, that speaks volumes, okay? It speaks volumes about what Putin's intention was. He didn't have enough troops to invade and take over Ukraine. He would have scared the bejesus out of Zelensky, and he succeeded in doing that. And Zelensky went to negotiations. They called for negotiations right off the bat in the first week of the war, and that worked. They got an initial agreement. We know what it says because the Russians have given us enough information. And we have some Ukrainian sources too. So what am I saying? I'm saying that when push comes to shove, you could see that that Putin and the Russian leadership were concerned first and foremost about the native Russian speakers in Donbass. They didn't want them to get shelled anymore. There were about 14,000 already killed civilians, okay? And that had an uptick at the end of or the middle of February 2022. The other thing, and you alluded to it, was this hypothetical. If the Russians had built bases in Mexico, what will they do? Well, let me just shock everybody and say that ain't hypothetical. It happened. You may not remember it, but I was on active duty at the time. I was at Fort Benning, Georgia, the Army Infantry Training Center, and there were no weapons. And where were the weapons? They were in Key West. And what were they doing in Key West? They were going to invade Cuba. Okay. The Russians tried to put medium range, intermediate range ballistic missiles in Cuba and succeeded. They put them in there. They had nuclear, they had atom war, they had nuclear warheads on these things, and they were ready to shoot. We didn't know all of that until later, but as you know, Kennedy stepped in and said, look, this is an existential threat to us. You don't need this. We have a balance of power strategically. Remove the missiles. Now, Khrushchev said, no. Look, Fidel Castro asked for them. Are you saying that a sovereign country has no right to choose its alliances? Ooh. Okay. And then he said, well, you got to keep me here. Now, Khrushchev finally backed down, right? Because he said to his military guys looking over his shoulder, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. This would have been really neat if we were able to hit Washington in 9 minutes, or those naval bases on the East Coast in 5 minutes. That would have been what. But let's get out of Dodge, and they did. Now, Khrushchev acted in a sensible way for Russian as well as for U.S. interests. An existential threat was not one for him. It was for President Kennedy. Now, fast forward to, 2010, 2015, all of a sudden, U.S. is building military bases, missile bases in Romania and Poland. If you don't know that, that's okay. It hasn't been much in me. Okay, so these military bases have these emplacements there, okay, canisters, which actually had been used for cruise missiles and anti-submarine missiles and all kinds of missiles, but you can't tell what's in there because it's got a cap on it, right? Okay, so there they stand in Romania and Poland. How long does it take those missiles? Let's say they're cruise missiles. Well, let's say they're run-of-the-mill ballistic missiles. Well, Moscow is with range about 9 minutes. And as Putin himself warned, the end of December 2021, if the hypersonic missiles, like the Russians and Chinese already have, but the U.S. is still developing, they will get them. The hypersonic missiles, they'll be, a time to target will be 5 minutes. Putin doesn't want just to have 5 minutes to decide whether to blow up the rest of the world. Okay, so he said that very clearly, and it's a very real consideration. In other words, the Russians feel there's an existential threat from NATO being in places like Ukraine. They're already in places like Romania and Poland. If you look at the map, Ukraine is a much more dangerous and longer border, okay? And they want to have to deal with that. Now, last thing I'll say on this is nobody knows this. But at the end of 2021, before the special military operation, Putin called up, that is, the Kremlin called up the White House, said, Mr. Putin would like to talk to Mr. Biden right away. And then say, well, wait a second. There's no need for that. Our negotiators are meeting in Geneva in just 10 days. No, this can't wait. Got to talk to him right away. So on the 30th, the day before New Year's Eve, 2021, they talked. And what came out of that, the readout said that Mr. Biden said the U.S. has no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Whoa! New Year's Eve, great rejoicing in Moscow. 6 weeks later, their next and last probably summit meeting, remote, read out Mr. Biden refused to discuss his earlier undertaking not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, and he wouldn't address the business about Ukraine not being part of NATO. So that was the 12th of February. The invasion came on the 24th, right? Yeah, 24th. One other thing before I run out of time here. On the 4th of February, Putin went up to Beijing to start help officiate at the beginning of the Chinese Olympics, Winter Olympics in Beijing. Okay, now best friend Xi, Putin's best friend Xi. Look, I think I'm going to have to invade Ukraine. I know you guys don't like, Xi says, you mean after the Olympics are over, right? so she understands, and it's sort of like a nihil obstat, nothing. Yeah, go ahead. Just don't tell anybody we told you it's okay. But we understand that when you have a core interest there, like we have a core interest in Taiwan, you're going to support us. We're going to support you. And my friends, that's the biggest strategic, earthquake, a tectonic shift in relations that has happened. Well, actually, in my professional career, because I started out in 1963 when the Russians and the Chinese hated each other to the point where the U.S. could take advantage of that hatred. That ain't the case anymore. The old equilateral triangle of Russia, U.S., China has shrunken into what we call a isosceles triangle, with the U.S. on the short end of the stick. That is tectonic. And that's what's going to matter in the coming years, because the U.S. is not only not indispensable, not even exceptional, not even a hegemon. And the sooner it gets to realize that, the better for all of us.
I think you're right. And I think based on what I've seen, the Russians are sharing a significant amount of military technology with North Korea. Certainly after the exchange as far as drone technology with Iran, I've read that Iran is expecting to get some Su-35s from 4++ generation fighters from Russia, and I would imagine that's not going to be the only technology. Before we go, your thoughts on, and it makes sense from the perspective of Russia and China. If you feel that the U.S. is threatening you from the Middle East to Asia, you want to have a very solid alliance of very well-armed allies from the Middle East to Asia. Before we go, your thoughts on the U.S., on Russia, particularly Russia, that what we know, they have probably some of the best military technology in the world. They're sharing that technology with Iran, with North Korea, and how important that is.
Well, with North Korea, something very, very unsettling happened. The Russians gave them a very advanced ICBM. Now, we know that. It's been tested once. Not ready to go yet, but that takes in all of the United States, okay? It has MIRV, multiple independently targetable recovery reentry vehicles, okay? It has all kinds of chaff and all kinds of things to defeat whatever ABM systems are in place. That's concerning. That's surprising to me. I never thought the Russians would give the North Koreans, give them out of their own control, give them this weapon. The rest of it, there's a strategic balance. But even then, that's very volatile. The Russians warned this week that, don't think the two oceans are going to protect you anymore. Don't think that, because they're not, okay? And when you have a trifecta coming up, with Biden being asked, well, how about Ukraine and Middle East? Can you fight 2 wars? No problem. 3 wars, oh no, we're the hegemon. Well, Janet Yellen, can you find that? Oh yeah, we got plenty of money. Well, it's unreal. Not only that, but the Russians authoritatively think this is a crazy policy. And I'll take one more minute if you have it.
Sure,
But
go ahead. Take your time.
Putin just did a big Q&A, previous one back in October of last year. He said this: look, when you asked me, a questioner asked why the U.S. is taking on China at the same time it's taking on uh, the Russians in Ukraine, Putin says, well, my answer to that is simple. I thought initially that there must be some subtle plan here, some little device that I didn't understand, but I no longer think so. I think they're crazy. I think it's a function of arrogance and a feeling of impunity. Period. End quote. Okay, now put yourself in Putin. That was my job, to put myself in the shoes of the Russian leaders. Okay. Now he's got a guy who's not fully compos mentis with the codes to the nuclear stuff, right? He's got a fellow who can't really be counted on to say sensible things or walk a straight line off the podium. Uh, as strong as this new alliance between Russia and China is, these guys have to be very, very, very worried that these military guys who think, well, maybe a mini nuke is what we need in the Ukraine fiasco to give those Russians a lesson, right? So they have to be on full alert, and so that's what worries me most. Nuclear weapons are around. Some people take them lightly, like some of our admirals and some of our generals. What happens? Let's finish with this. What happens when we definitively lose in Ukraine and Biden can't disguise that and the election season is full bore? What's he going to do? Last time, they said, well, we ran out of 150 millimeter shells. Well, we'll use cluster munitions. We'll use depleted uranium shells. Well, what's next? Well, the top of the cabinet there, that's where the combination lock is. That's where the mini nukes are. Let's try one of those. I think they're crazy enough to do that. It doesn't matter what I think. It's what Putin thinks. And he's already said he thinks they're crazy. So this is a tentative, a very delicate kind of balance we have now, the more so because of the personal stakes that you cited, not only Netanyahu has, but Biden, and not only Biden, but Blinken, it's got to be against the law to do this before the election, right?
Well, and there's pretty good, based on what I've seen, there's a good bit of evidence that Sullivan was deeply involved in the Russiagate. As you said, it's worse than a hoax, the Russiagate operation. So basically, the Biden and the people around him, if someone should ever decide to look into Nord Stream, the Biden and the people around him, their hands are filthy and they could never stand up to scrutiny. So you're right. They're very desperate people. So we'll, I guess, cross our fingers. That's all we can do. Well, no, we can keep doing this. We can keep trying to educate the public. That's what we can do.
Yep. And we do what we can do. Results are not unimportant. They're not unimportant, but they're secondary to the good that we do by just telling the truth. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, Garland, and I applaud your vigor and your stick-to-itiveness, as we used to say in the Bronx.
Well, thanks a lot, Ray. It's been a struggle lately. Boy, I hurt my back doing something. And, if you ever had a back pain, I've been going to the chiropractor, going to the acupuncture. He's turning me into a pin cushion. I don't know what hurts back. I don't know what hurts worse, my back or all of the needles that are being stuck all over my body from head to toe. But hopefully I'll get through that at some point. But as the Native American guy said in the Outlaw Josie Wales, I will endeavor to persevere. All right. Thanks a lot, Ray. Don't forget, everybody, go to raymcgovern.com. That's raymcgovern.com. And all Ray's good work is there. Links to all of his interviews and all the things that he's doing, the stuff he's working on, the articles that he's writing. Ray, where can they find you on Twitter?
Just at Ray McGovern.
At Ray McGovern. All right. Thanks a lot, all. Have a good day. Don't forget, everything's scrolling across the bottom there. Go to rockfin.com. That's ROKFIN, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Because, as you know, on any given day, they could decide that I don't have a place here on YouTube anymore. And if they do, all of my stuff is there, and you'll still be able to watch me there, and it doesn't cost anything to become a member. If you want, you can become a subscriber, a paid subscriber, but you don't have to. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Ray, thank you. Have a great day.
You're welcome.
All right. Talk to you soon. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate another wonderful day, a wonderful evening with Ray McGovern. I hope you learned something. I hope, if nothing else, we enjoyed ourselves, kind of had a camaraderie together. We talked. I looked in the chat and people were having some great discussions. So enjoy yourself. Everybody keep up the good work. And as Ray said, you know, try to educate people. Try to share this on your social media platforms. And when you find good stuff on online, share it on your social media platforms. When you find events that you can go to, whether it's for Palestine, anti-war, anything that you can do to address these issues, go to the events, support them in any way you can. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day. I'm out.